I was already late when I reached the church steps, the sky the color of old steel, and the wind pushing grit along the sidewalk like it had nowhere else to go. The building looked tired in the way neighborhoods do when rent keeps climbing. Brick that had lost some of its original warmth, steps worn smooth where generations had walked up with paper bags and quiet prayers. I didn't have anything fancy that day. No uniform, no briefing folder, no reason to be noticed. I carried what I always carried: a dented, insulated container for soup, paper labels, and a small stack of disposable gloves. Even the container felt like it had earned its own history. Scrapes along the side, a lid that didn't quite seal unless you pressed it the right way. I had learned long ago that people judged you by the surface. They saw a man in a plain jacket and assumed a story they could finish quickly. I'd learned not to fight the story they told themselves. Inside, the air was warmer, but smelled like onions, bleach, and something faintly sweet from donated desserts that always tasted like somebody's grandmother. Folding tables filled the hall. Volunteers moved with the practiced rhythm of repetition. Pour, ladle, wipe, restock, smile. Plastic cups clacked softly. A few church ladies hugged people at the doorway like the touch could reset a day that had gone wrong. Marisol was already there, tying her apron strings and checking a clipboard. She looked like she belonged to the building, like she could have been born in that kitchen, grown up among the paper towels, and never left. When she saw me, her face did what it always did first: polite, careful. Then it settled into the expression people used when they weren't sure what to do with you. "Wendell," she said, like she was reminding herself of a name. I nodded. I didn't offer a handshake. I didn't volunteer an explanation. I set the container down with the same slow precision I used for everything that mattered. My hands didn't shake, but they carried small reminders: calluses under the knuckles, a stiffness at the joints that came from work and from the kind of life that leaves marks even when you're done. "You can help with drinks," Marisol continued, directing me with the tone she used on the men who showed up without shoes polished or jackets pressed. "We need water and coffee set up near the doorway, and just stay out of the way, okay? It gets busy." The way she said it wasn't cruel. It was the way people talk when they've decided the role you fit. It was the same way other places had spoken to me at other times, like I was a moving inconvenience instead of a person. I heard it, stored it away like I stored everything else, and chose not to react. "Yes," I said. Marisol turned back to the clipboard. Her attention moved on. Mine moved with the room. There were men and women already seated on folding chairs waiting for the line to start. Some looked tired in a way that came from exhaustion, not age. Some had the hollow eyes of people who'd learned to stop asking questions because answers never arrived. A few wore work boots. A couple wore caps pulled low. Most kept their heads down, eyes darting only when a volunteer looked their way. I walked toward the doorway where drinks were set up: 2 urns, a box of cups, a small tray of creamer. I stacked lids, then lined up sugar packets, making sure the bin was straight. That kind of order felt natural. It wasn't showy. It was just what I did: make the next step easy for whoever came behind me. But behind the quiet routine, I kept listening. In my head, I was always doing that, tracking the room the way you track movement in the dark. The hall had its own rhythm, and I'd learned to read it like a map. People shifted when they were hungry. They shifted when they were angry. The volunteers' voices changed when they saw someone tense. When the line began, Marisol took her position near the head of the table, ladling soup herself with a practiced wrist. A few other volunteers offered coats, blankets. I moved between stations, pouring water, sliding cups forward, stepping back when someone reached too quickly. At first, the day felt ordinary. No sudden arguments, no frantic calls from the office. Only the steady sound of someone's stomach growling, the soft scrape of chair legs, the occasional laugh that sounded like it surprised the person laughing. I noticed a man who stood closer to the wall than he should have. He wasn't waiting in the line properly. He hovered just outside the serving area, watching instead of participating. His hands were tucked into his sleeves. When he shifted, the fabric pulled back just enough to show the outline of something dark in his waistband. I didn't guess. I didn't accuse. I just filed it away. My mind ran through possibilities the way it used to during briefings. Which direction he could move, where a person might be trapped, what the quickest way was to get everyone safe if things went wrong. I also recognized the particular look on his face, the tightness around the mouth, the stubborn focus that told me he wasn't looking at soup. He was looking for a moment. "Wendell," Marisol said suddenly, leaning in while she adjusted the flow of the line. "Can you take a tray to the back? The men in the far corner, some of them don't see the table right away." Her tone carried that familiar note. Help, but don't be a problem. I picked up the tray. My steps were measured because rushing doesn't make you faster, it makes you easier to trip. As I walked to the back corner, I felt eyes on me. Not hostile at first, just curious, like people wanted to figure out whether I was someone who mattered. I'd been overlooked so long that it didn't hurt anymore. It just felt familiar, like weather. I reached the corner table and set down cups of coffee. A man with a denim jacket watched me with suspicion that didn't have any target. He seemed to expect a reason for everything I did. "What's your deal?" he asked. I didn't answer. Not because I was refusing, but because I had learned that answering made people feel entitled to continue the conversation. I poured a small amount into the cup as if that were the only question worth the time. "Hey," the man pressed, voice sharpening. "You work here or you just—" His words trailed off as a commotion started nearer the front. A volunteer at the main table had stopped ladling. Someone else had turned, eyes fixed on the edge of the serving area. I felt the energy in the hall change, like the air itself had tightened. The man by the wall stepped forward, not into the line, not into a conversation, straight toward Marisol. Marisol's eyes widened. She looked up and saw him clearly for the first time, and her posture changed, shoulders going stiff, hands hovering over the ladle like she was calculating whether to keep serving or to get out of the way. I didn't hear the first words. I only saw what came after. The movement of his right hand inside his sleeve, the quick flick of metal that caught the overhead light. A weapon. Time didn't slow down dramatically like in movies, it simply became sharper. Everything became separate pieces, sound, distance, trajectory. I felt my body decide before my thoughts caught up. The stabbing didn't begin as a sudden scream. It began as a plan, because the man moved with purpose. He didn't stumble. He didn't panic. He advanced like he had already rehearsed where to place himself. Marisol stepped back half a pace, her apron string pulling loose at her side. A young volunteer, fresh-faced, the kind of person who looked like they still believed the world could be fixed, raised their hands, saying something I didn't fully catch. "Sir, please." The man with the weapon cut through that plea without hesitation. At the same time, another person moved. An older man standing nearby lunged forward, grabbing the man's shoulder as if physical presence could cancel intent. It worked for half a second. Then intent won. The weapon flashed again, angling toward Marisol's torso. The young volunteer's eyes went wide in a way that made my stomach turn. A woman in the chairs nearby stood up too fast, chairs scraping, voices rising. In that split second, I didn't think about how people would remember it. I didn't think about the honor or the story or whether I'd earned gratitude. I only thought, get her safe, get everyone past this moment. I stepped out from the side, tray forgotten, coffee sloshing and then spilling across the floor like a pointless rain. My hands went forward, not to grab the weapon directly at first, because you don't try to win against sharp metal by letting it touch your fear. Instead, I moved toward the man's arm, toward the angle of control. My voice came out low, steady. Not loud enough to impress, just clear enough to cut through panic. "Back," I said. The word landed like a door shutting. It wasn't a command for show. It was a simple instruction that gave other people a path. The man blinked, surprised more than afraid. His focus had been on Marisol. I had interrupted the line he expected. Marisol didn't scream. She froze for a beat, eyes locked on me, and I saw the disbelief in her expression. Her mouth opened like she wanted to ask a question, but the room didn't give room for questions. I shifted my weight and closed distance. My fingers found the fabric where his sleeve met his wrist. I didn't wrench. I guided, using his own momentum against him. The movement was careful, enough restraint to protect both of us from worse harm, enough firmness to stop the weapon from landing where it intended. He jerked, trying to twist free, but I stayed close. There's a kind of closeness you learn in training, where you don't let your body become a negotiable thing. I leaned in slightly, bracing, and forced his arm off the line. People reacted then, too late for hesitation, too early for strategy. A volunteer grabbed the back of a chair and swung it not like a weapon, just like a barrier, blocking the man's path forward. Another person stepped in, hands extended, trying to pull bodies apart without making it worse. I kept my eyes on his hands. That's the thing people don't understand about violent incidents. Eyes go to faces, but danger comes from hands. He tried to re-angle the blade. I shifted my stance by inches, steering his wrist away from Marisol again. "Marisol, move!" I said. It wasn't explanation, it was priority. She moved. She didn't run. She moved because there was no room left for confusion. She stepped behind the serving table, putting a wall between herself and the threat. The man's strength startled me for a moment. He had the kind of energy that comes from desperation and adrenaline, and he tried to fight through it. Then Deputy Rourke's voice cut through the chaos like a radio breaking static. "Everybody back!" The deputy had arrived because someone had called quickly. Not everyone can be first to a crisis. That's why I moved first, because by the time help is on the way, the first damage often already happened. Rourke's presence changed the temperature. It wasn't about authority alone, it was about procedure. His eyes moved quickly. His hands were visible. He created a new center in the room, an organized reference point. He saw the man's arm position and the blade. He moved with practiced speed, and another officer or security volunteer assisted from the side. The man with the weapon was pulled down, not with theatrical violence, but with controlled restraint. His breath came in sharp bursts. His eyes darted like he couldn't accept the moment was ending. I stepped back at the same time, releasing fabric and letting the space between us widen. The room was quiet in the way a crowd gets quiet after a near miss. Only the loudness was internal, vibrating behind people's ribs. Marisol was shaking. She held her hands in front of her as if checking for damage. Her face had gone pale, and she stared at me like she couldn't decide whether I was a stranger or an answer. I noticed a tiny red line on her apron, not from the blade, but from a brushed contact where the chaos had moved too close. I didn't point it out. I didn't say, "You're safe." I didn't offer comfort like a salesman. Instead, I moved calmly, scanning. I watched for anyone else who might be hurt. I helped a volunteer retrieve a fallen phone. I guided a woman with trembling hands to sit down. People kept looking at me, and their eyes carried the kind of question they didn't dare ask. Not, "Who are you?" but, "How did you do that?" They didn't know I had done similar things in different uniforms, different decades, with different names written in different forms. In the days after, I would remember the way that morning felt like every other ordinary morning, until it wasn't. The man was taken away. The officers asked for statements. Marisol gave hers with a voice that didn't rise above a whisper. She was trying to be brave without turning into drama. Deputy Rourke approached me afterward, stepping carefully around the spilled coffee and broken paper cups. "Wendell," he said, "you okay?" I nodded. "Yes." He looked at my hands, then at my face. He seemed to hesitate as if deciding whether to ask a question he shouldn't. "You handled that fast," he said finally. The way he said it wasn't praise. It was recognition mixed with curiosity. Before I could respond, Marisol spoke. Her voice carried the strain of someone holding fear in a tight fist. "He's just a volunteer," she said, like she needed to keep the truth from spreading too far. Deputy Rourke's eyes shifted toward her, then back to me. The expression on his face changed subtly, like he'd heard something that didn't match what he saw. "I don't mean to pry," he said, But you moved like you knew the ground. You didn't look at the crowd, you looked at the arm. Marisol opened her mouth, then closed it. She had that look again, polite caution, the same one she used when she addressed me as if I might break. I didn't offer details. I didn't say I had been trained for the kind of chaos that doesn't announce itself. I didn't tell him that in another life, I had stopped bigger threats with less equipment and more distance. I only said, "It's right to help." Deputy Rourke watched me for a moment longer. "What's your unit?" he asked quietly. My chest tightened, not because I was ashamed, but because I didn't like how the question made space for assumptions. People assumed that my answer would be a story for them, like my history was entertainment. I could have lied easily. I could have kept the peace. But there's a difference between restraint and erasure. Still, I didn't talk much. I didn't explain. My record had always spoken in whatever room mattered most. I had learned that the right kind of truth doesn't need embellishment. Deputy Rourke didn't wait for a long conversation. He glanced toward the officers, then returned his attention to me. "Come with me," he said. "I've got to document this, and I want to make sure you're okay medically." Marisol tried to object. He's fine, he's just—" "Marisol," Deputy Rourke said, gentle but firm. "Let's handle the paperwork. People go through trauma differently." He guided us toward a side room. The church hall felt oddly quiet as we moved. Conversations had resumed in low murmur, but eyes kept tracking me like a question on a sticky note. In the side room, the deputy's tone changed into procedure. He took notes. He asked basic questions. What time, what you observed, whether you were injured, whether you saw the blade. I answered plainly. I kept my words short. I didn't try to be impressive. I didn't correct his assumptions when he got close to the truth. He didn't need me to do his job. He needed me to be honest. Then he stopped writing. He reached into a folder and slid a document across the table toward me. I recognized the layout. I'd seen enough paper in enough decades to know the format when I saw it. "Your name came up," he said. "It came up in a way it shouldn't. Not on this event, on a past one." Marisol stood in the doorway, arms folded tight. She watched the exchange without knowing whether to trust it. Deputy Rourke turned a page slightly. "This is an old record request, a referral. Someone asked whether you were the same Wendell from—" He paused and looked at me, then swallowed. "From a different case. A man who did the same thing you did today. Controlled the threat. No theatrics, no apologies, just restraint." I didn't reach for the folder. I just listened. He continued, voice calmer now. "I checked. It's you." In my head, images rose briefly. Years ago, different uniforms, a different crisis with different lighting. The details came and went, but the feeling stayed. Duty that didn't feel like heroism at the time. Duty that felt like breathing. Marisol's face tightened as if she was absorbing a new reality. "So you weren't just—" she started. "I was working," I said. "Not defending, not correcting, just giving the truth a shape." Deputy Rourke nodded once like that was the only answer he needed. He leaned forward slightly. "I'm not asking for a speech. I'm asking because the city needs to know who it has in its community, and because people at your church keep looking at you like you're only a body moving tables." Marisol flinched. I could see it. The guilt she tried to hide. "We weren't trying to—" she began. Deputy Rourke held up a hand. "You don't have to try, you just do. People see what they want to see, until someone shows them the truth." Then he pulled the document another inch closer. On it were service details, dates, branches, unit identifiers. I didn't have to read everything to feel the weight of it in my bones. My record always lived in paperwork like a ghost, present even when nobody invited it to the conversation. Marisol stared at the paper, then looked up at me. Her voice came out softer. "You never told us." I kept my eyes steady. I didn't need to. There was no anger in me, no bitterness. Resentment is heavy. It drains you. I had carried enough weight in my life. I didn't carry resentment anymore. Deputy Rourke placed a hand on the folder, then slid it back toward himself. "Here's what's going to happen," he said. After the report is filed, I'll have this added to the incident record, and I'll make sure a copy goes to the Department Liaison for Veterans Affairs. You deserve to be listed correctly, especially if your name has been misread." Marisol swallowed. "He helps us every week." "Yes," Deputy Rourke said, "and sometimes people only recognize help when it's delivered in an emergency." That afternoon, after the officers left and the church kitchen reopened with a different kind of carefulness, the volunteers moved slower. The soup tasted the same, but the room felt different. It wasn't fear exactly, it was awareness. Marisol found me near the drinks again. She stood close, but not demanding. She looked at me as if she was learning how to see. "I'm sorry," she said. Her apology didn't try to sound dramatic. It was the kind you offer when you finally understand what you didn't understand before. I didn't shrug it off. I didn't accept it like it was a transaction. I just nodded. "It's okay," I said. Marisol's eyes glistened slightly, but she didn't let tears fall. She didn't turn it into her own moment. "I thought you were—" she began again and stopped. I knew what word she almost used. Not a specific slur, but the category that had shaped how she treated me. Man background, man problem, man to keep at the edge. I didn't let her finish it for me. "You don't have to guess what I am," I said. "Just keep helping people. That's the point." She nodded quickly like she needed permission to return to work. The rest of that day passed without more incidents. The soup kitchen did what it always did. It fed people, listened to them, gave them blankets and rides and phone numbers for programs that could help. But everyone carried the memory of the moment that stopped a blade mid-air. Over the next days, the story began to spread, but in the way truth sometimes spreads, crooked at first, then straight. A volunteer mentioned my name to someone else. Someone else said, "The deputy recognized him." Another person said, "No, they said he did that years ago too." Marisol became quieter, more careful in how she spoke to me. She moved around me like she now knew I was part of the structure holding the room up. People stopped saying, "Just stay out of the way," and started asking where I wanted to stand, what help I needed. I still didn't talk much. The truth is, being looked down on isn't always about cruelty. Sometimes it's about habit. People build a comfortable story. They decide what a person is, then they maintain the story by ignoring details that don't fit. I had lived inside that habit for years. But that day, the habit cracked. It didn't crack because I performed. It cracked because I intervened to stop a crime, calmly, completely, and without making myself the center of attention. That night, when I returned home, I sat at my kitchen table. The walls were bare except for a few family photos, nothing staged. I poured a glass of water and let my hands rest. Only then did my body acknowledge what it had done. My right shoulder ached a little. My knuckles were scraped where fabric friction had caught. Small pains, not dramatic. In the quiet, I thought about how many people had ignored me in plain daylight. How many times I had heard, "Just a volunteer," like that was the whole measure of my value. And I thought about Marisol, standing in that side room, holding my name in her mind like it was a key she'd been turning the wrong way. I didn't think about revenge. Revenge is a word people use when they want a story with violence. My story had no fighting for satisfaction. My satisfaction came from the simple fact that someone wasn't hurt worse than the moment allowed. In the days that followed, a local news reporter showed up at the church one afternoon. I recognized the style immediately, questions designed to produce a headline. The reporter asked Marisol for quotes. Marisol refused to talk about me as spectacle. She mentioned the soup kitchen mission, the man's actions that day, and how the church community had been tested. When the reporter asked if I would speak, Marisol hesitated. The reporter leaned toward me, and I saw the familiar posture of people who thought they'd uncover a secret. "What's your background?" the reporter asked. I looked at them and answered the only way I knew how. "I served," I said. "That's not a lot of detail," the reporter pressed. I didn't get angry, I just remained calm. Detail isn't what keeps people safe. Actions do. The reporter looked away as if expecting me to fill the silence with bragging. When I didn't, they turned to Marisol, searching for something else to mine. She gave a careful answer. "He helps us every week," she repeated, and her voice had a new steadiness in it. "And when something went wrong, he did what had to be done." I watched her carefully. She didn't turn the spotlight on herself. She didn't make the apology the headline. She returned to the purpose. A week later, a letter arrived addressed to the church and marked for Veterans Support Coordination. Deputy Rourke's office had filed it properly. The church administrator pulled it open in the front hall and read aloud the recommendations. Marisol stood near me, and I listened to the words like they were part of a service. Names and unit lines. Recognition not as a trophy, but as an official correction. A small portion of the letter referenced my service record and noted the need for proper outreach, work training opportunities, counseling resources, and community integration. It also noted the incident report from the soup kitchen day. Then the administrator looked up, voice carrying to the room without needing to shout. "We have a veteran here," she said, and the phrase landed with a different meaning than it used to. "A recognized one. We're going to do better. Not just with praise, with support." No one cheered. That wouldn't have fit the tone of the day. People simply shifted their stance. They stood a little straighter. They looked at me more directly. The same man who'd asked me earlier what my deal was, back when I was carrying coffee, stood near the doorway that day. He watched quietly, then approached. "Look," he said, his voice rough. "I talked to you like you were nothing. I didn't know." I waited. I didn't demand an apology because apologies can be cheap if you require them. I just let him try to be honest. "I thought you were just some old guy. Like you were there to pass time." He swallowed. "But you saved somebody." I looked at him, face calm, eyes steady. "I helped because it was right," I said. He nodded hard. "Yeah, I get that now." He didn't ask me for the details of my past. That was the difference between the kind of people who understand and the kind who only want a story. As time passed, the soup kitchen returned to its steady cadence. Volunteers laughed again. People lined up again. Families arrived with kids who asked questions too honestly for a world that wanted to keep secrets. Marisol kept me near the front line more often, not as a liability, but as someone with value in a practical role. She still didn't overpraise. She didn't turn me into a myth. We worked. I dispensed drinks. I helped sort donations. Sometimes I sat with a man who couldn't stop shaking after an old memory. I listened without trying to fix him. Sometimes I carried spare blankets to people who needed them quickly, like I was delivering the next necessary step. At the end of one Saturday, Marisol walked beside me as we locked the supply room. "Do you ever get tired of being misunderstood?" she asked quietly. I thought about all the years when people had decided my worth based on what they could see. I thought about how easy it was to label someone when you don't want to do the work of knowing them. "No," I said. Then, because the moment felt honest, I added one more sentence. "I get tired of work that doesn't get done. But work that matters? No, that doesn't get old." Marisol nodded. Her eyes looked tired now, too, not from fear, but from the weight of carrying a community. "We should tell people to stop guessing," she said. "They'll still guess," I replied, "but the right actions will stand up against it." I turned the key, listened to the lock click, and felt the small satisfaction of a job completed. We didn't talk about medals or records. We didn't talk about rank. Still, the truth had been revealed, and it had been earned by restraint. The man who brought the blade that day was held accountable through the legal process. The reports were filed. The evidence was logged. Nobody needed me to be the hero in a spotlight. That's what redemption looks like when you don't ask for it. It doesn't arrive as applause. It arrives as quiet correction, when the room finally sees what it refused to see before. When I returned to the church the next week, Marisol greeted me like she always did now, her voice warm, her posture open. She didn't ask me to stay out of the way. She asked where I wanted to be. I didn't smile like I'd won. I just did what I had always done. I helped serve. And in the back of my mind, I kept one simple memory from that day. The moment the blade's line would have reached someone it shouldn't, and the moment my calm, trained restraint broke that line without turning it into spectacle. The story didn't need me to explain myself. My record had already explained it in the only language that matters: what I did when it was time to act.